I want you to imagine you're along with me on a detective call-out. We've been called out to the death scene, and we're trying to figure out if this death scene is a homicide. There are 4 ways to die. You can die by natural causes. You can die by some accident. You can die by suicide. Or you can be killed by somebody else, a homicide. And we're trying to figure out which of these 4 ways our deceased happen to pass away. Not every death scene is a crime scene. And I'm going to give you a simple skill set that'll help you determine whether this is a death scene or a crime scene. Here we go. It's a principle that I simply call inside or outside the room. If we can explain everything that's in the room by staying in the room for an explanation, it's probably not a homicide. So, for example, if we get inside and we have a dead body and we also have a pistol laying by his side, but all of the evidence in the room we can actually identify back to him. His are the only fingerprints we find in the room. The only DNA we find in the room belongs to him. Even the skin cell transfer on the pistol belongs to him. That's actually his pistol registered to him. All the material evidence we find in the room, it comes back to our victim. Okay, well, if everything in the room can be explained by staying in the room, well, this is either a suicide or an accidental. Now, on the other hand, if the stuff that's in the room cannot be explained by staying in the room, if the best explanation is outside the room, we've got to shift our investigation. So, for example, if we've got unknown DNA in the room, we can't figure out who that belongs to. It's not his. Those aren't his fingerprints. That's not even his gun. His friends say he hates guns. So now we got to figure out where that gun come from. What if all the material evidence, if there's mud in the room that tracks out to the outside? Well, now clearly, the best explanation for what's in the room is not a cause in the room. It's a cause exterior to the room. All of our investigation efforts have to shift toward homicide. Why? Well, we have an intruder. That's clear. And when you have an intruder, everything changes. Intruders are the very thing that turn death scenes into crime scenes. Now, I will tell you this simple principle I used about the age of 35. I was not a believer. I was not somebody who believed in God's existence or in any faith system at all. And I simply wanted to know if God existed. And I thought, could I use my investigative template to determine if God existed? What if the room we were looking at is not a death scene, but is instead the entire natural universe? You know, all the space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry that we see here in the natural universe. What if that's the room we're looking at? Can I explain everything that I see in that room by staying in the room? Or is the best explanation something outside of space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry, something outside the natural realm? If the best explanation is something outside the room, well, now I got another intruder problem. Only this intruder would span the entire cosmos. That's what we're going to do in these next 8 sessions. We're going to look at 8 things that are in the room of the natural universe, and we're going to ask the question, can you explain these 8 things by staying in the room? We're going to look at the beginning of the universe, the fine-tuning of the universe, the appearance of life in the universe, the origin of life, and the appearance of design in the biology we do see in the universe. We'll look at mind and consciousness, free agency, the existence of transcendent, objective moral truths, and even the problem of evil. Those 8 things have to be explained, and there's only 2 ways to explain them. Either we explain them by staying inside the room with just space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry, or we explain them by jumping outside of naturalism, outside, something to extranatural, something supranatural, something supernatural. And we're going to begin today in this first session with the beginning of the universe, because that has to be explained. The universe is not eternally old. According to all the science in the last 150 years, the universe had a beginning. For example, there's good mathematics. Albert Einstein did some mathematics on this. Alexander Friedman did some mathematics on this that demonstrated the universe is not eternally old and has, in fact, been expanding. Wow. And not only that, we have good philosophical reason to believe that all space, time, and matter had a beginning. Even time had a beginning. Now I'm going to ask you to stretch your mind a little bit on this, because this is a difficult one to put your hands around sometimes. But if there's no beginning to time, we cannot be here today. Here's what I mean. If we had a racetrack we were running on, and I told you to stand at that beginning starting line, and I told you to run to the 100-yard marker, but every time you began to get ready to run, I told you to step back a foot. Well, I'm ready to go now. Step back a foot. Get ready, get set, go. No, step back a foot. Really? I'm ready to start. Step back a foot. Every time you are about to start, I continue to push you back 1 foot. Well, you're never going to reach the 100-yard line because I won't let you get started. Time is very similar. If I won't let you start time, you can never get to the 100-yard line we call today. The fact that we are here at today means there's a beginning to the race we call time. So even there's good philosophical reasons to believe that time has a beginning. But we see good things, we can observe good things in the universe that tell us the universe had a beginning. Mathematics and philosophy is not enough. We can see through our telescopes that the universe is expanding. We can measure the spectrograph on distant galaxies. They are shifting toward red in the spectrograph because they are moving away from us. And why does that matter? Well, if the universe is expanding, run it backwards. It means it's expanding from something. It's expanding outward because there's a beginning to the universe. Mathematics demonstrates it. Philosophy helps us to think about it, and we can actually see it in our telescopes. In fact, the second law of thermodynamics also helps us to determine the universe has a beginning because the amount of usable energy in our universe is diminishing over time. If you came into the room and you were the first person in the room and you found yourself a little wind-up police car and it was running around the room, the first thing you would do is look for who wound it. Well, why? Because you know that thing has not been running around forever. It wasn't running around overnight. That thing was wound a short time ago, and it's now unwinding before your very eyes. Well, the second law of thermodynamics tells us and demonstrates for us that the universe is unwinding before our very eyes. And that points to a time in the past in which the universe was tightly wound just like the police car. And if you think about that demonstrates yet again that we are in a universe that has a beginning. Here's another piece of interesting evidence. The amount of helium in our universe is provocatively high. It's the second largest ingredient. Hydrogen is the first element that we see in the universe, but helium, in order to be generated at the level we see it today, there had to be conditions, according to Sir Fred Hoyle, that were incredibly dense and incredibly hot. Well, this actually makes most sense if, in fact, the universe came from a position of incredible density and heat, expanding outwards, so we see the expansion. Yet another piece of evidence that demonstrates that we're in a universe with a beginning. There's even more reason to believe that we have a beginning to our universe. In 1964, two scientists at Bell Laboratories in New Jersey started to hear something they called cosmic background radiation. We now have actually seen it in satellites. We've photographed it and measured it across the entire universe. This low-level radiation that is still in the background. What explains that? Well, of course, if we have a universe that came into existence from nothing, we would expect that moment to be a moment of high density, high heat, and we would also expect there to be an echo, a lingering radiation that we would see in the background. And that's exactly what we see in the background. So it shouldn't surprise us. This is yet another piece of evidence. Now, here's a diagram that actually shows you how all of these pieces of evidence point to the same conclusion. Whether it's philosophical evidence, mathematical evidence, scientific evidence, they all point to a beginning of space, time, and matter, and therein lies the problem. How do we explain that? By staying inside the room of the natural universe for an explanation. I've seen three popular explanations. Either the universe has been expanding eternally, or it's expanding and contracting over time, and we just happen to be in a period of expansion right now, or there's some greater environment from which an expanding universe could come. We'll be discussing those in more detail in your participants guide, but let me just highlight one explanation that's often offered. Look, if we can redefine what nothing is, then when we say the universe came into existence from nothing, it might make a little more sense. One explanation that's been offered, and it's a popular one. For example, I hear it coming out of different academic institutions, like from Lawrence Krauss, who says if we just redefine nothing, look, if there is a space, he says, is a bubbling brew of virtual particles. And these things pop into existence without any cause at all. And if you wait long enough in that kind of an environment, one of these virtual particles could emerge and then eventually expand into a universe. Well, wait a minute. So you're saying there's an environment that has all the ingredients that weren't available to us. Space is a bubbling brew of virtual particles that if you wait long enough, well, that means that you have to have space, time, and matter in order to get space, time, and matter. But nothing is not space, time, and matter. Nothing is nothing. As Aristotle said, nothing is what rocks think about. Nothing. So you don't have those ingredients available to you to get a universe, unless you want to redefine what nothing means. The best explanation for a universe that has space, time, and matter governed by physics and chemistry is simply an eternal first cause that is itself uncaused, that is non-spatial, non-temporal, non-material. Wow. Think about those descriptions I just offered. That kind of sounds like what we typically would attribute to the being we call God. But already, in examining the first piece of evidence related to the universe, we have to step outside of space, time, and matter. We have to get out of the room for an explanation. That's why we have good reason, even in this very, very early part of the investigation, to believe we have an intruder.